I'm excited to introduce to you my latest podcast, Run It Like You Own It. In this podcast, we're going to explain how you can use the science of human behavior to gamify the workplace.
The Run It Like You Own It podcast with Wouter.
Welcome back to Run It Like You Own It podcast. Today we have Paul Stanton, one of the owners of Pushysix, with us today. And I know, Paul, that you've had some experience on all sides of the table.
It really caught my attention when you guys came in the first time and explained what you do, because I'd never really considered it being a service to bring that to a company like a manufacturing plant, and I just immediately saw the immense value in having worked in those environments and not as management right on the floor. I saw the value in what you guys bring.
People underestimate the value of good leadership in a facility, because not only does it change the economics for the company you're working for, fundamentally change those economics. It changes the quality of the lives of everyone that works there. And I always think it's a social obligation. If you take on a leadership role, you're taking on a responsibility and accountability that goes way beyond your responsibility that you take on for your paycheck and for the position. And I think people miss it.
Which leads into attrition rates and things that you can track on paper. That's so important.
Well, there's no way that you can, I don't believe that you can. I certainly can't. I can't spend a day at work and have someone micromanage me and give me shit and beat me up, and then go home and being a loving father and a husband to my family. I just, as much as we like to think that we can separate those parts of our lives and compartmentalize our lives, we're not that good at it. And it's really tough going through homework with a grade 4 after being beat up for 8 hours. And so, as a leader, you have a big responsibility, because you are messing with the lives, not only the people that are working for you, but their families as well.
Well, it's interesting because that can probably go the other way too. So that leader, what's his home life look like? Is he talked down to by his wife, perhaps? I always like to think about things a little bit deeper and figure out, why are people the way they are? What leads to that? Because it's often not what's immediately visible. I think everybody is a product of their environment.
Right.
And when you get somebody who, a lot of the times it starts as children, you go through abuse as a child, you're going to take that into your adulthood. And
it's probably one of the events that makes me most proud in my career. And I was leaving a facility, and I had a guy that gave me a letter, a guy that I didn't get along with very well. And he gave me a letter, and the letter was from his wife. And in the letter, it enumerated everything, my whole history at the plant. And she started by saying, I remember the day you arrived, because my husband came home bitter and angry about why you were here and what you were going to do and all that kind of stuff. And she enumerated his transformation, because he was a screamer. He was a bitter screamer, angry man. And she enumerated all the kind of changes. And this guy became a superstar. At the end, we never really got along very well, but he was great. But he knew what was in that letter, because he was the one that handed it to me. She made him hand me the letter. And the very last paragraph or the last sentence was, I just wanted to thank you for your time. For the time that you spent with my husband, because I believe that I've gotten my life back. And it's it really struck me. It reinforced how important and how value added just simple coaching can be. If you have someone that just says to you out loud the obvious. At the end of the day, you want to be better. You want to be good. You want to be stronger. And
let me ask you a question.
It was huge.
How motivating was that to you?
Oh, I bet you that was 20 years ago I got that letter. You got to think about it. I don't like telling that story a whole lot because it's self-serving in essence, but it's absolutely motivating. It's been motivating for my whole career.
Do you think any monetary compensation could have matched something like that?
Doesn't do that. I was high as a kite for a long time. Yeah. She was a really good coach. She kept me going. So, I'll never forget, I can picture the guy's face. Never met her. I have no idea what she looks like. I can picture him in my mind's eye right now.
That's fascinating that it can affect your own life so drastically.
It was a pretty detailed letter. It's pretty thorough. So you mentioned earlier that you worked at a veneer plant.
Yeah, so actually it was my second job right out of high school, 18. I worked in, it was a LVL plywood mill,
Yeah.
and it was unionized. First time I'd ever been in a union. And that was kind of a steep cultural shock for me because it was like, my first job was construction, and I worked on a big commercial project. And it was just, you work hard. If you don't work, you're going to get sent home. And it was like very much performance based. And then I went from that to being thrown into this union environment where it's, hold on a sec, like, don't be too gung-ho, like. So it was just such a cultural shock. It's like everybody's trying to do the least they can possibly do in a day to not attract attention to themselves. So it's like you've got this whole crew. It's almost a game of how poorly you can do your job without attracting the attention of management to get written up. So
Absolutely incredible. Well, at least you had a challenge every day. It just wasn't a very motivating challenge.
well, going from my previous job to going into that was like just a complete shock to me. And I started off really strong work ethic, and then I noticed over the course of a couple of years, it was just completely beat out of me. And I became a terrible worker, and I was almost just one of the worst ones at that place, actually, because it's like there's no incentive to do any better than the next guy. All your promotions are determined on your seniority,
Right.
not necessarily your competence, your conscientiousness, your merit, things that normally would dictate a promotion, right? It's all seniority. Your wage is determined by the collective bargaining agreement. You can't you just got to wait it out until you get seniority. That's the only way to get ahead.
So aside from salary, and you could talk about that later, but aside from salary, which was the better job?
The construction job I had.
Did you bag the elephant with the plant job and this big pay? It's a unionized job. They can't get rid of you. You don't really have to do anything.
So when I was 18, actually it was before I was at LP, I went and I took a truck driver training course, got my class 1, and I was going to be a truck driver. And my instructor told me something that stuck with me ever since. And it was the most wise words of wisdom I think I could have received at that time. He said to me, you can either be comfortable or you can be happy. And that stuck with me, man.
That's a great line. I haven't heard that.
And at the mill, I was comfortable.
Yeah.
But working construction in that very, very tough environment, I was happy. And I didn't work in it very long because the project was over and they offered to send me up north and I didn't go. I wanted to stay in my hometown. And that was why I got a job at the mill. But I was happy because the sky was the limit with that place. I could work my way up. I could outperform the next guy and get a better job just because I was competent, I was a good worker. Whereas at the mill, that I was comfortable because you can't get fired. So at that place, I was comfortable because I had this stable job that I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, but I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of courage for me to eventually leave that job because you start building up seniority, and if you leave, you lose all your seniority.
You get used to a safety net, and then it becomes a trap.
Totally, yeah. and it is a trap because a lot of people would stay there for 40 years. You can't leave and go try something else for a couple of years because you come back, you're square one, right?
What I find often is when you work in some facilities that are like that, the people feel trapped and they didn't get out of it. They're really bitter. They're really, really bitter. They have a good wage. They have a good job. They're competent to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no worse life than being lazy all day long
Being comfortable.
and being too comfortable.
Yeah.
That's very remarkable. Never heard that line. I got to remember that line.
It stuck with me to this day. And that, I think, is what eventually drove me to entrepreneurship. Because I was tired of being comfortable. Entrepreneurship is the complete opposite of comfortable. For a lot of, especially when you're starting out.
It is scary.
It's scary. You're taking a huge risk. Especially when you start to have employees and payroll and you got bills. Bills don't stop. Sometimes unfortunate things happen with your contracts. Bills don't stop though. They don't. Whereas a union job, you've got a steady paycheck coming every 2 weeks. You can rely on it. You know approximately what it's going to be. You've got sick days. If you get sick and have to go to the hospital, you've got short-term disability and all the rest of it, right? You're very, very comfortable.
It's only been a few years of my life, you can count it in months, that I had someone else give me a paycheck. Every other month of my whole career, I had to put food on the table and gas in the car from what I earned.
What makes
scary?
Which makes you more happy?
I don't know. I always assumed I'd be an entrepreneur my whole life. I always assumed that I'd be responsible for my own future, my own fate. And so when I had my first real career job, when I was settled into it, I was already looking for a way to get out. Right off the bat.
Why?
That's a good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that question before. I don't know. I think it's just self-reliance, the accountability to yourself, the responsibility of it. Now, I've had some really uncomfortable times. I've had some remarkably uncomfortable times in my career. But I don't think I've ever considered going back to a regular paycheck.
How did it make you feel having a regular paycheck?
Back then?
Yeah.
Well, I was just out of school. It was my first career job. I was pretty happy. But I felt really limited in my ability as well. So I wasn't in a union shop. I was in a place that allowed people to excel. But even then, I felt limited. I felt constrained by the limits that the company put on me. And I saw opportunities too. I wanted to do better, to do more, to make things bigger, brighter, nicer.
So you had that glass ceiling above you that you couldn't...
Yeah, I don't know how real it was, but I certainly felt it. I certainly perceived it from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So
I started out in that mill and I went from making $15 an hour to 26. That lifestyle that I had overnight just changed, and it's like I was really happy at first. There was at least a better part of a year I felt really good. Because my life had changed, right? And it hadn't really, but then the dust settled a bit, and I remember being able to take a calculator and calculate exactly how much money I was going to make in the next 45 years of my career. And I had this number, and I was learning a lot about like investing at the time and compound interest, and so I was adjusting for all of that. And even so, the number I saw in front of me to me, that was my glass ceiling.
right.
And in those environments, a promotion might look like $2 an hour. You get seniority, you bid on a job, you get a couple $1 an hour raise. But I was within $7 an hour of the highest paid union person in that mill on day one. So it's a very short spread of. So you can work your way into management, and there's other paths to get out of the union and whatnot, but that wasn't particularly appealing to me. But I just remember I did the math one day and I'm like, this is my career. I've got it right in front of me.
Yeah. And, this is a little bit of a change of subject. Or I guess we're going back a little bit, is that often in work, people talk to me about, that they're bitter at work, they're angry. They say it in so many words. And I try to convince them, I talk to them about building something, that there's value in building something. And it's the people that pursue happiness that are always unhappy. You're not going to get happier by upgrading your car, by buying something for the long run, or having, like, it's not things that make you happier. It's achieving stuff that gives you satisfaction. So if you think you're going to be happier by spending 2 extra days a year in Mexico or something like that, it's just not. You're fooling yourself, because there's always that other hurdle. But the people that have the most satisfaction, the ones that aren't complaining about their life, are the ones that are out there working all the time, doing stuff, adding value, either to themselves or to others, those around them. And those are the people that are happy. If you pursue happiness, you're going to fail. If you pursue doing good things, you'll wake up one day and find that you're pretty happy with what you've done, that you've contributed. And so
it's nothing to do with money, what you've just said.
Yeah. I think money, certainly in the workplace, I think money is a bit of a scorecard. And, people use, because we all make enough to put food on the table and gas in the car, for the most part. And so money now becomes a little bit of a scorecard after the fact. And we use it as a little bit of bragging rights. But while, wealthy people have more opportunity, to do stuff that makes them happy, I think at the end of the day, there's some of the most bitter, angry people out there.
I've met many of those people.
Yeah. And they're you see stars all the time that are just bitter, angry people who are hounded by paparazzi, that don't have any peace, don't have any quiet, and are always dissatisfied with their, the state of their life.
And at one point in their life, they thought that was going to make them happy, that lifestyle. They were completely disillusioned by the reality of when they get there. They don't want it anymore. And a lot of them pull a Britney Spears and they cut their hair off and they, it's such a common thing.
Such a false victory. All these kids, I'm going to be a famous rock star. Right until they become a famous rock star. I mean, how many rock stars, how many superstars kill themselves on drugs? And what they're doing is finding a shortcut to happiness. That's what they're trying to do. And they end up killing themselves.
So I worked in that mill for a period of about 4 years.
Yeah.
And during that period, I recall a time where, I don't know if it was intentional on management or if it just kind of happened. I don't know if they were intentionally trying to gamify it for us, but essentially that's what happened. And I remember it got very competitive with the other shift. There were 2 shifts, both 8-hour shifts. It was swing shifts, so you do 2 weeks of days and then 2 weeks of afternoons, and then you switch. But I remember our shift just got so competitive, and in a way, I'm reluctant to use the word fun, but it was kind of fun. The shifts went by a lot quicker, and I remember at one point we were really close to beating a record for the shift, and it was our last coffee break, and the guys, it wasn't even from the foreman, the guys voluntarily worked through their last coffee break to hit that target.
Yeah.
I can't remember if we did it or not. I don't think we did. I think we came close, but it was a completely different work environment through that period of time. And for whatever reason, it was a short period of time. What ended up happening, I think, was we started seeing a lot of issues with maintenance. And so we'd have these 20-minute bouts of downtime during a shift, which makes it very difficult to set records, to be competitive, and it's something out of your control. There's a lot, as a person in operations, that is in your control, like plug ups and being more vigilant and that there's a lot you can prevent downtime, and during those competitive times, a lot of that downtime was virtually non-existent because people were so invested into it. But there was still those maintenance things that you couldn't control, right? So I think that really demotivated a lot of people because we started seeing a lot of downtime on the lathe, which was essentially the start of the line. And then when that happened, the whole competitive system just kind of fell apart, right?
You can, so when you create an environment like that, you can gamify maintenance as well and do that as shared interest in the win from there. And so, yeah, when you're playing a game, sometimes you lose. So the trick is now you got to go back and say, okay, how do we prevent from losing again? And it's so ironic. Like, I'm so glad that you went through that because it seems counterintuitive. You're working harder, you're stressed, you're taking less breaks, you're getting more frustrated when equipment is down. And yet at the end of the day,
Shifts just flew by.
ships flew by. It's more satisfying. You're driving home feeling it's a little bit better. I remember I was in a sauna one time and we had been talking to the shift leader and we were going to try and set a production record. And we had talked about it for a few days and we were getting all excited about it. And we had decided that if we hit the production record, we were going to bring in Chinese food the next day for everyone. And so we hit the production record. It had to be a good hour, an hour and a half before the end of shift. Like we nailed it. We absolutely nailed it. And the shift leader gets on the radio and says, congratulations, everyone. You know, we just hit the shift record. Don't bring lunch tomorrow. We're having Chinese. And you could hear the whole sawmill just kind of got this, oh, you know, everyone kind of cheered and got it. And then 15 seconds later, the plant foreman gets on the plant superintendent gets on the radio and says, well, Joe, I hope you bring your credit card because we're not paying for it. And you could feel the vibe in the plant disappear because no one there wanted to like, they didn't want to put a liability on their foreman for it. And it's like all this excitement, all this fun, all this challenge. We all felt great, you know, for $300 worth of lunch. We just sucked the energy out of everyone in the plant. I felt really guilty about it because I should have, you know, it was my job to set him up. Hey, this is going to come. How are we going to react? You know, prepare him for being on the radio. And get him out there walking through and tapping everyone on the shoulder and saying, you know, nice job, kick ass. Because then we would have maybe done it again. Instead, we just killed it. It died. All the motivation died. It's amazing
How it can disappear in a
how
second.
it can disappear in a second. Can we think back about maybe the best boss and the worst boss that you've ever had? So just like take the extremes for the best and worst bosses that you have. What
The worst boss I ever had was a guy who would micromanage every aspect of our job. He was, he'd stand over your shoulder and he'd watch you do things and he'd criticize. You got to do it this way. Here's how I would do that. That same supervisor is responsible for a vast number of people resigning at that workplace. People do not work there anymore because he was their supervisor.
It's absolutely remarkable how much impact a bad supervisor has. One person can have on a whole operation. It can be absolutely devastating to them. In the end, often they get a lot of attention and often they get a lot of accolades from their bosses.
And he did.
Because they're on the floor, right? They're on the floor all the time and that's what you want. But they're on the floor to give people shit, not to get them to be challenged and to do well.
Well, and the guy I'm talking about, he did improve certain metrics in the mill. There's no doubt about that. Things on paper did improve. But I like to call those vanity metrics because they completely ignore the fact that people are quitting their jobs because of this person. And hiring was one of the biggest challenges that mill had. because it was such a remote location and people aren't just abundant like they are in a city like Calgary. So in the midst of a hiring crisis, this person is hemorrhaging staff. Yeah, sure, he's reaching targets that are important to them, and that's great. But look at the greater impact. Again, on paper, you probably look fantastic. And I don't really think the upper management realized that, or because I think if they saw it from our perspective, they would have got rid of him in a heartbeat.
Right.
But instead, they promoted him. He did his job well, but is it worth having people quit over that?
Yeah, just imagine if we go back to that example I gave to the sawmill, where instead of having the superintendent get on the radio and slam everyone, imagine if he had walked through there with big smiles on his face and kind of, tapped everyone on the shoulder. It's like, kick ass. Didn't think we'd get here. We just broke a record that lasted 3 years. That he was part of that win, part of that victory, that he was the one of the people cheering. What would happen the next day?
I bet you the next shift would have made up for more than $300 worth of Chinese food.
Yeah, absolutely.
In production.
You can spend $300 in a sawmill
In 30 seconds.
in 30 seconds in a heartbeat. I've had guys directly tell me that when I've talked to them, they're saying that, well, he knows you can't push me that hard because he knows if I do this on this machine, it's going to cost him an hour and a half of downtime. And he's going to be the guy getting shit, not me. I've had guys tell me that frequently. I got the power here because he's the guy getting in trouble if I screw up. So he knows he can't push me. Wow, what a great environment.
We had that same kind of dynamic because and it did come to that at times where there'd be sabotage.
Yeah.
People were bitter. They were resentful against particularly that one supervisor who I was talking about. People would sabotage just because they didn't like being talked down to, which he would do. I mean, it would cost tens of thousands of dollars in downtime. I believe I think it was $600 a minute. I think 30 seconds for 300. That comes from a number I remember.
Those are common numbers they have in these big facilities.
Because it's a whole line. Like when one piece of the line goes down, the whole line goes down.
Yeah, in no time. Oh.
And we talked about the maintenance. And what I noticed when I was there is it was kind of compartmentalized into different sections of the mill. So the line I was on, there was intense competitiveness through the 2 shifts on that line, but at no point did that extend to the different areas of the mill or maintenance. Right. So I think part of that disconnect, what essentially ended the competitiveness, was maintenance wasn't invested into that. And then we started seeing downtime, and a lot of it's not their fault, but some of it definitely was. They brought in some new software that really disrupted things a lot, and so
so demotivating.
It was very demotivating.
So demotivating when they're looking,
because there was no way of winning. And then everybody's morale just goes down.
So again, this is the importance of getting the right metric and the right game. And so, if maintenance is killing you on the operations side, and this is what this was a greenfield operation that I was working at, is we wanted to measure production for the day, which is too much because there's always something broke and busted. And so we tried doing it by the quarter or by the half day, and then we went down to the quarter. And but there's just so many failures. We ended up our metrics were mean time between failures. How long could we keep the line running? And so that kind of became the game. That became fun. And so because what would happen is, we'd start in the morning, and then something wouldn't fire up. It would take us 40 minutes to fire up. Well, there's no way you're going to set any kind of record that day. There's no way anything's going to get done. Everyone's demotivated. Everyone's slow. Everyone's still in first gear. You just can't get going. So instead of losing that whole day, can we work on the quarter? Can we work on an hour? Why don't we nail this hour? Or why don't we see what we can do? How long can we run before we stuff up a machine? Because everyone's still learning that. And so you want to set people up to win, not to fail. And so you were failing because of something out of your control, so it becomes demotivating. Change the metric. Change the metric. Get to something that they can control about, and then be sympathetic. Be sympathetic with bad stuff happens. There's a certain reality. Not everything is going to be roses. That's okay. But let's change the metric. When you're on the machine, when you're running, okay, how long can we do before we stuff the machine?
That's really interesting that you say that. That's very wise. That almost leads me to believe that the workplace I was in was gamified by chance and not by the advice of an intelligent consultant such as yourself, because it was one metric. It was basically your shift production. It wasn't downtime. It wasn't. Whereas if the right person had come in and coached them a little bit, again, like I worked there for 4 years, and this was maybe a 3 to 6 month period of that really intense competitive work environment, which we all loved and appreciated. But it didn't last, and the most of the time I was there, it was not gamified at all, or it was just so demotivating that any attempts for us to make it competitive just fell apart.
So when we start, and when you first put the first metrics in place, there's a lot of resistance. So there's fear that there's going to be a lot of retribution if you don't make your numbers. There's going to be retribution, and it's always scary. You're going to be uncomfortable, or you're going to be comfortable. You're going to be happy. There's already, you put metrics in place. They're going to make you uncomfortable, and so it's tough at the start. The fear is that they're going to get measured. Their excuse is, well, you can't measure my job, or the metrics are inappropriate. I don't worry about metric quality at all, because these things aren't, they're not written in stone. They're not going to the CRA. It's not going into the books of the shareholders. They're just metrics on the floor. So let's try a metric, and if it doesn't work, let's switch the metric. And if it doesn't work, let's switch it again. So I don't worry about metric quality. Let's just get a metric. Get people comfortable with the metric. Realize that it's fun. It's gamifying what's going on. And then they'll switch it up. Hey, we're using the wrong metric. We shouldn't be measuring this. We really should be measuring that. And whenever someone says that to me, I just smile and nod. Because then they have ownership over it, and they know the business better than I do. Sounds good to me. Where are you going to post it? How are you going to collect the data? It doesn't have to be the perfect metric. We're always worried about the perfect metric. It's the last thing you have to worry about.
Have you ever made a more complex metric that would be more of like a formula that would perhaps account for downtime, things out of their control, where they could still be competitive? Because if we had something like that, where essentially you get a score at the end of the day, not your total production or something.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you two answers, and then they're gonna conflict with each other. But just smile and bear it as we go through it. The problem with the really complex ones is that people don't really understand it. And so, like, I suspect that your efficiency at your veneer plant was, I don't know, probably around 80% or something, in the mid 80s. And the reason why I'm guessing that is because if you're in the 90s, everyone knows that that's bullshit. If you're less than 80s, it gets the management team's attention. And so whatever metric you put together, the number is always going to come out in the 80s, because it's nice to see everyone seems to be happy. Low 90s, maybe low 90s, certainly mid 80s or higher. But it's absolute. Most of them are crap. They're just made complex that people don't understand. If you went back to your plan, take a stopwatch. Just measure the number of minutes that the plant's running versus the number of minutes that it's not. I bet you'll be lucky if it's in the 70s, certainly for a veneer plant. But we can't publish those numbers because it forces an action. And so we use metrics that are unnecessarily complicated to do that. I really like simple metrics. How many board feet did you put through? How many minutes did you run? Something really, really easy. And then you can start breaking it down. Well, how many of those were maintenance? Or how many was it because we stuffed the machine? Or how many was it because, for whatever reason, we lost alignment. lost alignment on a piece of equipment or whatever it is. I like to start with simple, but what happens is people always, once it's gamified, they start from the simple and then they want to incorporate more and more stuff. And they want a big score at the end of the day. And so this is why I'm saying I'm kind of playing both sides of the coin. Usually when we go in there and it's not gamified, people have metrics to use them as an excuse to hide from the real numbers. At the end, then we go simple, and then they become more and more complicated because they want to capture all the stuff on the other side. And so I let that happen. But then there's more ownership in it. And they've developed it, and it's not the management team that's developed it.
Interesting.
So this is why I kind of play, there's no easy answer to that. But I'd rather have simple. What were the number of minutes that you ran that plant today? I think that would be a scary number, and I suspect that if you went back there, they still wouldn't know that number because to publish that number is too scary. Sometimes you see production in the morning meetings, you have these production reports, and there will be literally 30, 40, 50 metrics on it. Because we're so good at computers measuring all this stuff, but the reality is if you have 50, none of them really get that much attention. It's great for investigation after the fact, like you said, but for day-to-day operations,
It's meaningless.
it's meaningless. And the human mind doesn't operate on 50 variables. We operate on 3. How much did you produce, or how long did you produce, or what was your quality metric at the end of the day? Right. Well, that's what you got to do. And it says that is what we have to improve. Well, maintenance has a piece of it, okay, and then we have operations has a piece of it. Okay, let's break it down into those two. Operations, you worry about your half. Maintenance worries about their half, and then get them to figure out. The maintenance will look at it, and they're going to break it down by machine center, or they're going to break it down by whatever makes sense for them. And then that's what they work on. And the irony is that maintenance is metrics. What they're good at is fixing machines. So they don't tend to measure a lot until something's broken. I want them measuring everything running.
Time between broken
Stuff, so that the activities that you're doing are to keep equipment running, not your speed or cost to fix it.
And that is what caused a lot of frustration, was lack of the preventative maintenance that led to the downtime. Belts were hanging on by a thread and they just leave it rather than replace the belt. Little things like that caused downtime that just completely demotivated operations.
Is your plant insulated? Was your facility insulated?
Sorry, what's this? It wasn't. It was pretty good. It was pretty good. It did get a little chilly if it was.
Did you ever have trouble with freeze ups?
Yes. Yep.
It kills me. In sawmills, it kills me every time. So typically sawmills aren't insulated, and they have really poor ventilation systems. Although now they've gotten much better. And every year it would get cold and it would freeze up, and there'd be 3 or 4 days of absolute pandemonium. And somehow we couldn't prepare for it. Every year it happens. It's going to happen within 1, 2 week or 3 week period that it's going to freeze up. And every year we couldn't freaking prepare for it. It drives me crazy. Mm-hmm. It's like, why? The fact of the matter is I just wanted them prepped. We know it's going to freeze in the next 2 or 3 weeks. What's everything that gets us? And let's start preparing so that that doesn't get us this year. And you have that in the oil fields as well. It's like we're going to have lightning strikes, and we're going to have flooding that happens. We're going to have winter freeze up. We're going to have a spring. We're going to have thaw that comes out in the spring. We're not going to be able to drive on the roads. These are all events that we can't prevent from happening. We know when they're going to happen, and we can prepare for them. And yet we typically get caught off guard every time. And if you bring people in a room and say, hey, what are we going to do to prepare for freeze up this year? They say, oh, well, except for we don't do it. Because, let's gamify it. Let's make it fun.
Thank you for watching the Run It Like You Own It podcast. Visit forefrontperformance.com or find us on social media at forefront.performance.